There are engines Detroit would rather you forget, machines too efficient, too durable, and too threatening to the carefully structured automotive hierarchy of their time. Two such giants, the Chevy 292 and the Ford 300, were locked in a quiet war of endurance and torque for decades. These inline-six workhorses weren't just designed to be reliable, they were engineered with the potential to outshine their V8 siblings. But that potential was never fully realized, not because of technical limitations, but because of calculated decisions made behind boardroom doors. The Chevy 292 and Ford 300 had the makings of revolutionary platforms, but were deliberately capped to protect the profit margins of more expensive V8 options. Long before Japanese imports took the spotlight for efficiency, American automakers were already developing their own lean, fuel-conscious engines. Ford's 300 cubic inch inline-six debuted in 1965, quickly earning a reputation as the beating heart of the F-Series trucks for over 30 years. Around the same time, Chevrolet launched the 292, an evolution of the 235 with an eye on its use in commercial-grade vehicles. These weren't headline-grabbing performance monsters like the muscle car V8s of the era, but beneath their utilitarian image lay engineering marvels that were overbuilt, underhyped, and profoundly capable. Yet, the truth behind these engines has remained in the shadows. What the public never saw were prototype versions of both the Ford 300 and Chevy 292 capable of far greater performance. Insiders now suggest that Ford had tested 300s reaching 230 horsepower, while Chevy's 292 prototypes were pushing 210. But when it came time for mass production, those numbers were quietly buried. Why? Because executives feared these six-cylinder power plants could eat into the sales of their premium V8s. It was a classic case of internal cannibalization, and profit came first. Despite these constraints, both engines earned cult-like loyalty from those who knew their real value. The Ford 300, with its large 4.9-liter displacement, edged out the Chevy 292's 4.8-liter in terms of torque delivery and was revered for its low-end grunt. It produced 265 pound-feet of torque at just 2,000 RPM in its fuel-injected form, in a modest 150 horsepower on paper. But its strength was never in numbers alone. It was in how it pulled, how it lasted, and how it withstood punishment that would destroy lesser engines. On the other hand, Chevrolet's 292 was no slouch. Its highest factory rating showed 165 horsepower and 280 pound-feet of torque at the same 2,000 RPM, giving it an edge in output despite a slightly smaller displacement. Built with a rugged cast iron block and known for its reliability in medium-duty applications, the 292 was a favorite among mechanics and fleet operators. It was designed for utility, but just like the Ford 300, it was also built for more than it was allowed to be. Engineering differences told fascinating stories. Ford's 300 used a 7-main bearing crankshaft, giving it tremendous durability under continuous heavy load. Chevy's 292 used a 4-main bearing setup, less robust in some ways, but with greater potential for high RPM operation when properly tuned. Bore and stroke also played roles. The Ford had a 3.98-inch bore and 4-inch stroke, while the Chevy sported a 3.76-inch bore and stroke. Each setup served specific goals: low-end power for the Ford, revving potential for the Chevy. Even the intake and exhaust designs reflected their unique personalities. Chevy focused on balanced air distribution across cylinders, solving a common inline-six issue. Ford, meanwhile, engineered an exhaust system designed to reduce back pressure through tuned runner lengths. Compression ratios varied across models and years, but the balance between power and longevity was always deliberate. But here's where it gets especially intriguing. Durability tests from the era prove these engines weren't just tough, they were nearly indestructible. Fleet records from the 1970s and 1980s show Ford's 300 routinely exceeding 215,000 miles before needing major repairs, with many lasting over 500,000 miles. Chevy's 292 matched that performance in real-world commercial use, regularly pushing past 400,000 miles. These figures outpaced many V8s of the era, despite less fanfare and often less maintenance. Design details contributed heavily to this. Ford's cooling system featured expansive water jackets that kept each cylinder at ideal temperatures, especially under heavy load. Chevy countered with optimized oil circulation to key valve train components, preventing common wear points. Both engines were known for their heat resistance, crucial in commercial and industrial applications. Maintenance records also reveal quirks. Ford's Achilles heel was front crank seal leaks over time, while Chevy's timing gears were prone to wear, but both issues were minor and easily addressed. Internal documents, some of which have surfaced through Freedom of Information Act requests, showed just how much these engines were held back. Reports from 1967 suggest Ford engineers had a version of the 300 that exceeded 230 horsepower with only modest changes, and Chevy's test bench data confirmed their 292 could break 210 horsepower. But these variants never reached the public. The likely reason? V8s offered bigger margins and better marketing potential. Releasing fully optimized inline-sixes might have made sense for consumers, but not for shareholders. Even within the companies, there was resistance. At Chevrolet, a lead engineer allegedly resigned after management refused to greenlight his revised cylinder head design for the 292, a design that increased airflow by over 20%. Ford, too, had experimental tech ready to go, including a primitive form of variable valve timing for the 300 that was quietly shelved. These weren't pipe dreams, they were real innovations, buried in favor of safer, more profitable paths. In hindsight, the Chevy 292 and Ford 300 were not just engines. They were victims of a system that prioritized short-term profits over long-term innovation. Their lasting reputation, however, comes not from advertising budgets or magazine covers, but from decades of loyal service, mechanical resilience, and grassroots admiration. These engines outlasted the vehicles they were placed in. They outperformed expectations. And most importantly, they left behind a legacy too loud to suppress. By the early 1970s, something strange happened. Plans to bring more efficient versions of these legendary inline-six engines to market were quietly shelved. In 1972, one particularly promising upgrade that reportedly improved fuel economy by 15% mysteriously vanished from internal development schedules. While the public remained unaware, the aftermarket world began to uncover what manufacturers had intentionally buried. These engines had far more to offer than Detroit let on. With just a few modifications, such as basic head porting and swapping camshafts, mechanics were unlocking an additional 50 horsepower or more from both the Ford 300 and Chevy 292. These gains came with virtually no loss in reliability, suggesting that the factories could have easily implemented such improvements. But corporate strategy came first. Keeping these engines in their lane meant limiting performance to avoid overshadowing their V8 counterparts. One of the most telling indicators of the strategy was how neither engine was ever seriously considered for use in performance models. Despite their balanced design and tuning potential, neither the Mustang nor the Camaro ever featured these robust straight sixes. That exclusion wasn't due to mechanical shortcomings. It was a calculated move to preserve the image and price tiers of the brand's V8 lineups. Still, the engines found a second life in the underground racing scenes of the 1970s. On Midwest dirt tracks and local drag strips, these inline-sixes started turning heads. In budget racing categories like circle track and bomber classes, heavily modified 292s began outperforming V8s with consistency. At the same time, the Ford 300 was earning respect in endurance events where reliability outweighed raw horsepower. A defining moment came in 1978 when 3 Ford F-150s, each powered by slightly tuned 300s, successfully completed the brutal Baja 1000. Most of their V8 rivals failed to finish. The drag racing world soon followed. In 1981, a turbocharged Chevy 292, stuffed into a 1972 C10, ran a stunning 12.3-second quarter-mile at Lancaster Dragway. That same year, a Ford Fairmont equipped with fuel-injected 300 clocked 13.1 seconds. Impressive numbers for engines never designed with racing in mind. One man, Chuck Knighton, became a legend among enthusiasts. Often credited as the pioneer of inline-six performance, he developed specialized heads that dramatically improved airflow. His naturally aspirated 292 build produced over 300 horsepower on the dyno, an achievement so unsettling to General Motors that they allegedly issued a cease and desist letter to stop his aftermarket work. Across the world in Australia, racers also took notice. Ford's 300 engine became a popular base for touring car builds. During the grueling Sydney to Melbourne endurance races of the mid-1980s, 300-powered Ford Falcon secured podium finishes 3 years in a row, firmly establishing their dominance in long-haul competition.
Back in the US, grassroots oval racers embraced the 292 for its ideal combination of torque, reliability, and budget-friendly parts. When properly built with a balanced rotating assembly and enhanced airflow, these engines could reliably rev beyond 6,000 RPM for entire racing seasons with barely any maintenance, something even V8s struggle to achieve at a similar cost. Today, these once overlooked engines are experiencing a renaissance. Since 2015, the value of the Ford 300 has quietly surged, with mint-condition examples selling for over $8,000, a massive leap for an engine originally considered little more than a utility tool. Similarly, clean Chevy 292s, especially new old stock (NOS) units, are fetching up to $5,000 at specialized auctions. Modern technology has only expanded their capabilities. With electronic fuel injection systems and advanced tuning, both engines are reaching performance levels that would have been unthinkable in their heyday. Turbocharged Ford 300s are now regularly putting out over 400 horsepower without sacrificing their legendary reliability. Meanwhile, re-engineered Chevy 292s equipped with updated cylinder heads are supporting power levels that would have once been considered sacrilegious by factory engineers. Restoration and performance shops have embraced these engines with open arms. Companies like Vintage Inlines and Classic Inline Performance now manufacture high-performance parts that fix original design flaws while pushing output far beyond factory limits. These aren't just restorations, they're rebirths, revealing what these power plants were always capable of. What's more, their influence is visible in today's engines. Ford's modern EcoBoost lineup borrows heavily from combustion strategies first explored in the 300's chamber design. GM's compact turbo engines follow a similar bore stroke optimization perfected in the 292 over half a century ago. Online forums and enthusiast groups continue to grow, filled with younger gearheads rediscovering these engines' potential. The so-called Six Appeal movement is alive and well, offering a cheaper, simpler, and more character-rich alternative to modern performance platforms, if you know where to look and what Detroit tried to hide. In the end, the rivalry between the Ford 300 and the Chevy 292 is more than just a tale of torque curves and horsepower ratings. It's a story of suppressed innovation, corporate control, and the unstoppable passion of the people who refuse to let these engines be forgotten. And while the Ford 300 may edge out in raw torque and aftermarket availability, both power plants earned their place as icons, not because of marketing hype, but in spite of it.